So today I'm going to try and give everybody like a general overview of stuff. I mean, even if you've done a bit of animation stuff before, you can feel like you're ahead for a bit. But so if you haven't done anything in Maya before, the kind of biggest problem you'll run into with this whole program is that it's massive. I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on and on. Lucky for you, we're like focusing down one very specific path in this course. The reason why, I mean, but if you think of it, the reason why it is so massive, because if you think about like the process of actually, say, designing, say, digital model or special effects for a film, there's so many different pieces to it. So like there's people who are only in charge of modeling. There's people who are in charge of programming the custom modeling tools. There's the people who design the character rigs and the interfaces that control the characters. There's the people who actually animate the characters. Overall, there's people who animate the details of the characters. There's the people who design the materials. There's the people who design the sets or virtual sets and do the matte painting. There's the people who do lighting, on and on and on. So it's an extremely large process, so when you make a piece of software that has to handle most of that, it gets extensive. We're only going to talk about animation. We're not modeling anything. We're only animating stuff. But again, one of the things that gets people confused in terms of looking at different menus and things, and it doesn't help when I'm on a projector when it shrinks everything, you can't see the names, but in the top left corner here with the little drop-down menu, you can see that there's 7 choices there that change the menus at the top. Again, that's because like there's kind of 7 different kind of possible modes to the program that unfortunately kind of change your menus you get up here at the top. So normally you'll see like any of your sort of menus are there. Also you get tabs of kind of normal things along the way here. Down the left it's kind of like any other program of just like your sort of basic tools of select, lasso select, move, rotate, scale, and a couple of view options. The other thing that starts to change it, especially from, say, even like a 3D modeling software, you start to understand at the bottom, because this is time, right? Like you don't normally have to think about time if you're just like modeling a shape, yeah? So the confusing part is, even though you have a single viewport, it's now essentially a new one because this is time changing at the bottom, right? So in the same way as I was saying, we're moving something over time. Well, how do you determine what that time period is? You do this at the bottom. And this sort of, when you see 1, 2, the unit of measure that's talking about is frames, right? So in the same way in like old school animation, you would say like a frame, right? That's what this is. So the way you start to think about that, and what you should think about from here on, like standard motion is like 24 frames a second, right? That's sort of cinema motion. That's how quickly things are happening. So 24 frames here equal 1 second in the real world. And once we start doing these things, you'll notice also on the right here, there's things that kind of look like a normal DVD player, play, fast forward, go back to the beginning, and all that. This number shows us what the current frame is. So obviously if I pull that forward, that'll change it here. This bottom part can get people confused at the beginning because it's kind of like a way to focus on what frames do you want to look at. So right now we're only showing 24 possible frames, right? So if we're going to do anything very complicated, you're going to need more than 24 frames. The way you show more frames is if you, say, type in a number here. So if I type in, say, 300, right? You can see that it's now going from 1 to 300. Yeah, and you can kind of expand or contract that throughout the file whenever you want. It just kind of gives you a way if you're wanting to kind of fine tune something. You can say only look at these things, but there's no kind of limit to the number of frames that you can look at within a file. If you look at it on this end, so say you didn't even want to see it from 1, you can also just start to kind of grab this little slider. So now I'm only looking at 132 to 300. So to start out with, I'm just going to make a simple box. So by doing that, I'm going on just the polygons tab here and just dragging a box. From here, just so you know, the kind of interface to Maya, it's all based on the Alt key. So holding down Alt, left mouse button is rotate, right mouse button is zoom, and center, like pushing down on the scroll wheel, is pan. So you pretty much have to have a mouse to use this program even on your laptop because it uses a lot of center button stuff, and also just the normal kind of scroll wheel with zoom. If you do Control and Alt at the same time, you can draw a window. And I'll send you out I'll email or just actually post on the website a kind of simple list of hotkeys. It's also pretty well documented. One of the ones you'll want is the letter F, which is frame. So whatever view you have, it's kind of zoom extents, so you can see everything that's in the frame. So if I pick my objects, things start to happen over here, which even if you're used to kind of modeling programs, are going to be a bit different. So as soon as I select it, this kind of view is called the channel box. And the channel box is kind of it gives the sort of most basic information about the object. So it's translate X, translate Y, translate Z position. So where is it in the world? Its rotational values, its scale values, even the sort of values it was made with. Because the difference with something like Maya is that all of these properties are dynamic. So now it's at 0.7, if I change it to 1, it's going to move it there, right? So the reason why all properties of all objects are kind of these sort of dynamic numbers is so you can animate them over time, right? So any sort of value can be animated, and I mean anything. So because all this program is just a big kind of network of numbers, and numbers can be animated over time. So starting with like the most dull animation of move a box, right? So to do that, first I'm going to rewind it back to frame 1. Yeah? And what I really want to do is I'm going to move it in Z, and a lot of you will be used to Z being up, but in the world of animation, Y is up. You can flip it, but everything I'll ever show will be Y up. So what do we need to do? I mean, because all we're doing over time is changing that value, right? So like I said, if we were doing it in old school fashion, it would be like, all right, frame 1, I want it to be here. Frame 2, here. Frame 3, here. Frame 4, here. Frame 5, here, right? But we don't have to do that because like anything, the sort of heart of all digital animation is based around the idea of keyframing, right? So unlike traditional animation where you have to draw every step, with digital animation you define a start point and an end point. and it interpolates everything in between for you. So what I need to know to set a keyframe is like, what is the value, like where and at what time. So to do that, I'm going to select the object first, and there's a million different ways, and any tutorial you go through about keyframing or doing animations will show you a million different answers, but I'll show you the most basic. So I know for this, I'm just going to animate it in the Z direction. Yep. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm on frame 1. I'm going to highlight Translate Z, right click on it, and say Key Selected. So now it means that on frame 1, I've basically saved its position, right? Because I can move these things around all I want, but keyframing, it says like, all right, store that position. The other thing that's important is now I need to know what frame am I going to change the keyframe on next. So you always change the time first. So I know that on frame 50, I want it to be over here. So first I change it to 50. So now I'm on frame 50, which until you get used to it, like it seems a bit weird because it's exactly the same view, exactly the same thing, but it's just the fact of designing with time. So now I'm on frame 50. I can either do it by typing in here of saying like 20, or I can do the move tool by clicking here and moving it. I'm going to say I want it to go there. And now I have to key it again because it's like saving the value on both ends because you need a start point and an end point. So again, I'm going to highlight it, right click, and say Key Selected. So now if I rewind it and I hit play, it moves, right? Also, if I just like scrub through it on the timeline, you can see 50, it's here. Yep. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the basis of everything, right? Define a value here, define a value somewhere else, and have it change. So, but you can keep obviously adding in time. So like now, say frame 50, it's here. Let's say frame 100, I want it to be back here. And then I key it again.
I have a question. Should I hold it after?
Yeah, hold it for just a minute. So let me get through this part. And then, so this was just kind of keying one value. The shortcut, which works a lot of the time, so I'm just basically going to get rid of all these. You can also, whenever you're doing this, say I'm starting it, you can also just use the hotkey of S, and that just keys everything, right? So I'm on frame 1. Again, now I go to frame 50 or 52, hit S again, and it's all saved. The advantage of doing it that way is if, like, before I'd only keyframed the Z. So now if I decided out here on frame 100, I wanted it to go up here, it wouldn't have picked it up because nothing was actually saved in the Y. So honestly, the simplest method is just with the hotkey of S, like just keyframe everything. There's other times when if you're animating other stuff, that you have to do it with right-clicking on it, but S will do it. So
is that, I guess you'd only do it the way you showed us first, if you're like wanting to do like flex movements, like
sometimes
move it X here, and then at this point you want to start moving in Y direction or something? Or?
Exactly. Like once you get down to things being really, if you want it to be really controlled and you really only wanted to handle like one channel at a time, yes. And then that's my habit. You can always also get rid of the keyframes if you highlight everything and right click and hit break connections, that gets rid of your keyframes. But let's say instead of deleting them, like, now it goes here. Like, what if you're like, I actually want that to happen faster or slower, these sorts of things. So you kind of mock it in, and again, like, the program's all about kind of dynamic changes, so it's very rarely like, okay, it's not usually set the keyframe if that's not what you want. You don't necessarily delete the keyframe and make a new one, because basically everything is adjustable. So I'll show you the two best ways of adjusting a keyframe. The kind of easiest to understand is by using something called the graph editor. And to get to the graph editor, there's a menu up here that says Window, and it's always up there. So it's going to be Window, Animation Editors, and Graph Editor. Yep. And this will be extremely surprising, but when you open the graph editor, it looks a lot like a graph. So you have two axes and a graph, right? Nothing is on it though, because it only ever shows in the graph editor what's selected. Because if you can imagine, if you have a scene of like 50 objects that all have like animation graphs, you don't really want to see everything. So it only ever shows you what you selected. So when I select my cube, these curves appear. And the important thing to know in the graph editor is the same thing works, where I'm going to press F to frame it, which actually shows me my values, right? So when you look at the graph, this axis is time and this axis is value. Because if you think about keyframing, that's all you're doing, right? You're defining 2 points of a line. It's connecting those 2 points and filling in those values for you, right? So you can see this little line that, as I scrub in the kind of time down here, that's how it's determining the value, right? It's just like intersect that line, give it that value. So even though I've only defined it here and defined it here, that's how it knows what those values are. So, and you can see that they're colored, so if I just pick like translate Y, that is the graph of the motion for translate Y. Yeah? Because obviously between the first two keys, nothing was happening, and then I moved it up. Make sense? So let's say if I wanted it to happen faster, I basically just like move the keyframe back in time, right? Because if you're saying go to the value of 50 in 10 frames is different than saying going from 0 to 50 in 100 frames, right? So the way you do that is you select your key, and you can see here, like, it turns up yellow, and there's a couple different ways to do it. So the first thing next to the little stats here, that's the frame number it's on, and that's the value it has. If I want to say make it happen quicker, I change the frame. If I could say change that to 70. And now, obviously, the motion of this is going to change. It hops up much quicker, right? Because it's... And what's important to understand in this program is like all the there's a lot of interfaces to exactly the same information. Because you can see the object now, like if I pick it here and again hold down the middle button, I can just pull it. And right now the object's moving because I'm changing what value it's fed to it, right? Because it's intersecting that graph at a different point. So I'm changing its position in time. I'm basically changing time rather than the object. So I can pull it up, pull it down. And even if like once you start getting into more detailed things, you can also see the sort of smoothing between them. So when I pick it here, you can see it gets these two handles. You can also say pick one of the handles, and again with the middle button, even adjust the sort of smoothing tangent between them. Right? So I mean, there's extremely fine controls to all these things of moving up and down. But the key to all of it is you start to layer it together. So now I have it. Just so you know as well, you can also add in keys here. So if I wanted to say add in another key here, I can click on this tool, and again with the middle button, click it. Oh, wait. No? Sorry, I forgot. So tool here, which has a key with a little plus sign next to it. You left click to select the curve, and then middle click to pick where you want. So now there's a new keyframe. And doing it that way has exactly the same result as me pressing the hotkey of S saying set keyframe. It's just adding a new one into the system. So now I'm going to go back to doing it in this interface. And there's honestly not usually a kind of right or wrong way to do it. There's kind of 50 different ways to accomplish these things, and it's more whichever one you prefer. Some people prefer doing everything here. Some people do it in the graph. It's up to you. So now, okay, box goes up. I'm going to say move it over a bit. Key it again. Go to this frame. And again, I'm just typing in the exact value rather than moving it, but it's all interfaced to the same information, and I'm going to key it again. So now when I hit play, box goes up, box goes down. But you can add in the other stuff too. Like, what if I say, okay, box comes up, box is happy. And now from that point, I want to make it seem like it's falling. So I've already got, so when I get to this bottom rotation here, I actually want to change the rotation. So you can pick on the rotation tool, or the hotkey. The hotkeys for move, scale, rotate. Move is W, rotate is E, and scale is R. It's more what you'll see me do. So now I want it to have rotated, let's say, like, actually I'll just type it in for 720. And then key it again. I forgot to key it at the top, sorry. This is where it gets a bit messy sometimes of multiple channels. That's really weird. So obviously that's not exactly what I want. So I'm going to go back to my graph for a second. On my rotate X. Okay, that didn't go so well. That's the real question is why it's going to negative.
No, it gets me a couple times when I was
All right, we're going to undo for a second. Back in time. I got a little too... this would be a good time to show you another way to fix keyframes. So right now, I was showing everything in the channel box. You can see that in 2012 and the newer ones, you can also get to the attribute editor. And the attribute editor is basically, there's a lot more stuff that's possible and going on. It's just the kind of more extensive version. So if I go in here and under my rotate X box, I want to right click on it, and it brings up this little menu that says pcube1 rotate X dot output. And what that does is basically bring up the sort of Excel spreadsheet version of keyframes. So where this is the frame number and this is the value. Basically what's happened is I put in too big of a number and it freaked out. So even if I just did like 180, because it's actually doing several rotations at once, it's kind of being unhappy.
I think it's because when you set the
yeah.
down, you saved them all, so it saved it to 0 right there before it starts rotating.
So, can I delete it? So then in my, this does answer the original question of why not just keyframe everything. So,
Is there no way just to remove a keyframe instance?
Yep. That's where we're headed.
The box is falling from frame 120 through frame 180, and you set the keyframe at 180 where it's at the bottom, and then it's flipping between 180 and 200, which is why you're taking the bottom.
Exactly. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back in here on 180, on rotate X, and delete it. And that was just pick it and hit the delete key. So now, yeah. Yes, because that's where, since I keyed everything rather than doing them individually, it did it. So that's why I can go in here now and then just delete them back out. So, to keep it on time here. Oh God, sorry, I just right after. So, I've got like 10 minutes here, so needless to say, we'll be going through a few more of these next time as well. The other thing to start to understand is, you know, there's singular objects, and you can also start to make kind of groups and sub-objects of different things. Actually, you know what? We're going to skip that. We're going to do that next, and I'm going to show you something else. So first of all, it seems simple, right? So we've got numbers, transfer numbers. To give you a bit of a peek into where this can head, though, for us. You know, we basically have a strand of numbers we can control over time. Save that one. Where the course is going here pretty soon, after we start dealing with animations, you don't need to know this part, by the way. You've got to be kidding me. Hold on. No, that's the plugin that I've made. So if you look over here, basically where we're going is, you know, the same thing that's happening on the screen is now running this little guy.
It's making a servo noise?
Yeah.
It's because he's got a
That was an actual servo.
Yeah. If you look here, right? Just to give you a kind of quick, like long and short view of where this is heading, you know, all the sort of physical actuators and stuff, like those things understand numbers, right? Servos understand a number between 0 and 180 that control its angles. Stepper motors understand a number telling it step forward this many or step backward this many, right? Purely a number. Other motors understand speed by like a number of like 0 to 255 and another number that flips its direction. Basically what you would normally have to do that stuff is through software, right? You would have to write the control software that then control all these things. But the small leap we're going to make is in the same way that we can animate these things, we just link them to the physical stuff. So now when I, you know, keyframe my box on screen, what did I say here? It is out. So I'm going to key it the old-fashioned way. Then I'm going to go to, say, frame 50 and say go to 100 degrees. Key it again. And then here, say go to 50. And we key it again. So now, you know, hit play. Right? So, I mean, where we're headed, like, there's no difference between the two. I mean, all of the things that are, all the sort of rotations and properties and movements of everything in the physical is purely going to be controlled by these things. That's it. You know, because even like doing like simple servo motion like this, you know, you'll end up writing, you have to define it every frame, right? You have to say, move to this angle, then loop through this, and then go back to here. We're just animating. If I want it to go faster, again, we're not coding it. Go to the graph editor. So in the same way, you know, if I'm saying, you know what, I actually wanted my servo to move a little quicker, pull it back, or say a bit less, pull it down. Yeah?
Does the graph editor have some way of like inputting equations to define the lines?
No, but other things do. That's what we will talk about next time. But yes, there's other ways. You can. This is defining motion by you defining points. You can also define motion mathematically. Same thing. We're starting here, though, so I think it's important to. Depending on if you haven't done anything, because we're hitting up against the time here. So essentially next week, I need like everybody's first keyframe animation, right? However far you can get with it is how far you can get with it. But, you know, everybody's first keyframed animation in Maya is kind of plenty for next week. Where we're headed next is basically starting to look at digital machines, right? So in the same way, man, I can get my Brad Paisley tickets. In the same way in machines, you know, go back to my original example. I'll do this quick. Right? If you want to start talking about like rotation to translation in a kind of physical object, you have to do it with linkages. In the digital world, it's actually much easier because any value you see to an object, it can be animated, but it can also be like connected to anything else because it's just numbers. So let's say that, you know, what at the end of the day is what's driving the servo is the rotation and the y of this object. But what if I actually wanted to drive the servo through the vertical motion of this guy, right? So I want, as I move this guy up, for it to proportionally rotate the cube, right? So in the kind of virtual world, the same way that if you would make that sort of piston linkage, right? Much easier. So again, under our window in animation editors, this is where we're going to spend all our time next week, which is the expression editor. And the important thing to understand in Maya is that every object you make has a name. Right? So right now, by default, it's called p cube 2. This person is called p cube 1. And as long as you know an object's name, you can send it information. Right? It's kind of like, as long as I know your email address, I can send you an email. Like, that's all I need to know. Is like, well, who am I sending it to? But to do this, I know his name is p cube 1, and the attribute I want to control is rotate y. I know this one's called p cube 2. I'm going to give them better names than that. I'll call this guy servo 1. You can name them everything. It's better to name stuff, so it actually you know what's happening. And I'm going to call this person handle. Yep. So the simplest version, I would say servo dot rotate y equals handle dot translate y. When I create that, oops. Oh, it's because I didn't call him by his right name. It said you can't do that because that person doesn't exist. So it's actually servo 1 dot, I can shorthand it and just say ry equals handle dot ty and finish it with a semicolon. Yeah? So all I've said is connect those two numbers together. Oh, come on. What? You can also cheat when you're losing your mind. So servo 1, rotate 1 equals oh, it's because I keyframe. The reason why it kept freaking out on me is you can only either have it controlled by an expression or through keyframes. You can't have both, right? So this thing is already being controlled by something. There's ways around that, but we'll get into it. So to do that, I'm going to break the connection first and then create it. So now, I'm not rotating this thing. I'm moving the box. So now as I move the box, box rotates cube, cube rotates servo. Obviously right now, I've literally just connected these two numbers. So said whatever's in this box, plug it directly into that one. The advantage of expressions is like, what if you wanted to change that relationship? So since these kind of addresses represent numbers, you can just treat them as numbers. So I could say, you know, times 10. And now the rotation of this cube will be 10 times the movement of this one. So it's more like a wireless connection, right? Like it doesn't have to be physical, it's just kind of a wireless data connection between the two. So this is where we're headed next week. I'll give you my quick example of something to to enjoy. Right. This was my first virtual machine. Right? Only input is one single rotation. It's just being fed to a lot of other stuff. Yep. So, I believe we have hit our time limit for today. Yeah. So, two things for next week. I will send everybody out the sort of invitation so you can add stuff to the website. Everybody should add all their sort of material and videos and everything from today on there. And then next week, I want to see everybody's first keyframed animation of your choice. And next week will be mostly just me talking on Maya stuff. But you know, have a look at it and just start playing around in it because it's a big program. Things go wrong, but you know, there's no nice way to do it.
Time slider